and relation, and because I talked with Tom, who is unfortunately not here today,
Yeah.
but he pointed me to this, that in the etymology, relatus, this latus means to bear, to carry forth.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting word.
Yeah.
Uh, I played around with this. I don't know why this is there. It's even in the German word Verhältnis. You also have
Mm.
this carrying. And I thought, language wants to tell us something. So, and for me, this is like something. I thought relation is something like the capacity to bear a world.
Boom. Welcome. Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back. Hello.
Yeah. It's been a bit. It's been a bit since
Been a
we've
while.
talked. And I understand that you've been undergoing some work in translation of some Evo's work and going to school, and you're at this point of needing to choose what direction or what school you're going to, and or not school but method you're going to be trained in, and
Yeah.
life is underway.
Yeah. Yeah, where can I start? Um, I've uploaded a while. It was around in the Christmas holidays. I uploaded this talk on the paradigms in psychotherapy.
Mhm.
And here in Vienna, there are these. There's a couple of people founded a new university like 20 years ago. That's where I'm going to. It's a private university, and because psychotherapy has been taught in kind of associations.
Mhm.
This is actually an interesting story, perhaps, for the viewers. Sigmund Freud, he was very yeah, convinced of his teachings,
Yeah.
um, and he had this discussion with Eugen Bleuler, who was a very famous psychiatrist at the time. He was kind of the first one who described schizophrenia, and he was the the head of the Burghölzli in Zurich. It was very famous psychiatric clinic. They had a little bit of discussion, and Freud, because Freud, what he did, he was taking out his teachings from the university system,
Mhm.
almost back in 1920, 1930. And Bleuler criticized that because he thought, your teaching should always be challenged within a kind of university
Yeah.
framework, so they can grow, they can adapt, and so on. But Freud put it into an association,
Mm.
and there, then what happened is that it's kind of the teachings have never been challenged, really. I mean, there have been developments,
Mhm.
neo-Freudians, Lacanians, and so on. Um, but since then, at least in Europe, and I think also to a certain extent, I think also in the United States, to my knowledge, um, psychotherapy often, and Jung and so on,
Yeah.
all these people, they've been taught in associations.
Yeah.
To get today, when like in Germany, there's just one professorship for psychoanalysis.
Mm.
And mostly Freud and Jung and these people, if they are taught, then they are often taught at cultural studies departments or literature departments.
Mm.
Um, and so that at least here in Austria, and I think in Europe in general, that psychotherapy is taught at universities is rather a new thing. Um, Now, these associations are very numerous.
Mhm.
There are more than 20 of them. Some are very small. For example, Daseinsanalysis is the smallest. That's the thing that is coming from Heidegger and was developed by Binswanger and Boss, to Swiss psychiatrists.
Yeah.
The Jungian association is also very small.
Mhm.
Um, and they're all a little bit they're like their own sheltered worlds. They're
Yeah.
they're and the people there, for example, when you go to the Jungians, then they read, I don't know, Edward Edinger and maybe Henry Corbin and Jung's writings. And when you go to the Freudians, you only read, I don't know, Melanie Klein and Freud and Lacan.
Mhm.
But there are almost no cross connections, which is
Yeah.
really interesting in its own way.
Yeah.
Um, and so the university kind of where I am, they try to bring all of this together
Mm.
in a certain way,
Mm.
trying to also offer some dialogical or hermeneutical tools, so
Yeah.
these different paradigms can interact.
Yeah.
But I'm still in this position. I have to choose one method, or at least, yeah, one method. And
Yeah.
so I'm very interested in more the let's say the schools that come from humanistic psychology, existential philosophy,
Mm.
like
Yeah.
existential analysis, Daseinsanalysis,
Yeah.
Gestalt therapy, and so on.
Yeah.
Also, those that really take the body seriously,
Yeah. Yeah.
because in classical analysis, I mean, you produce a text
Yeah.
in the interaction between therapist and client. There's a text produced,
Yeah.
and then that text is interpreted.
Yeah.
That's what Freud did in his interpretation of dreams, this
Yeah.
famous groundbreaking work.
Yeah.
Um, but then there were these later developments that really were focusing also, okay, let's
Yeah.
also include the body, let's also include the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is more than those schools that have grounded themselves upon phenomenology. And now we'll segue into a little bit something else. My personal thing is also that I want to, at some point, I think that therapy has to be grounded in something like Scole.
Yeah.
And that's actually how often what I hear is like people are very busy in their lives, and those 50 minutes or that 1 hour of therapy is their time. There
Yeah.
they have time for themselves. There they can really talk, okay, what's going on in my life? What's really concerning me?
Yeah.
And I've noted and kind of intuited from a very beginning that Scole and therapy are some way interlinked, and I think this should really be emphasized too.
Yeah. Totally. And it's really interesting to think about what Scole, the way Scole comes about in the therapeutic context, and so much of even in Freud, right? So much of the context of a therapy session had to do with relationship, right?
Yeah,
What that there was something. being enacted in that relation that was, all different perspectives kind of came out of that, right? Of what the relationship was and what it was doing. However, the way we come to ourselves, right?
Mm.
It being relational seems to be kind of fundamental. And I'm also hearing, in what we talked about earlier, like you're being drawn, you know, and what you just said, it's like that it sounds like one of the things that you're drawn to in the work is the thing that's most relational, like the gestalt, right? Is you meet with the group, right? There's all this group work and the dynamics and all that kind of stuff, right? It's like it's not so much this Cartesian self-reflection, right? Where
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah,
remove the relation, right? Or the relation just becomes the thing you project your subjectivity
yeah.
on so you can see it and reflect about on it. It's more
That
like
that
Gestalt's essence is it's all about the contact withdrawal, right? In the figuring
yeah,
ground. And
yeah,
it's all about
yeah, yeah,
all the disorders are seen as relational disorders in that contact
yeah.
withdrawal cycle,
Yeah.
right?
That's even when I read some scholarly critiques, for example, of Carl Jung. I noticed in a variety of different people, for example, Tom Cheetham, right, who John Lewicki loves a lot, and I've read all of his books because Corbin, someone like Henry Corbin he was kind of like corresponding a lot with Jung and Heidegger, and I really like him too.
Who is this
But
you're talking? Who are you referring to here? That you
Tom Cheetham, he's he has written a few books on Henry Corbin, and
okay.
Corbin was this
Oh
Ibn
yes, yes, yes,
Arabi
yes. Yeah,
Sufi scholar.
yes.
Anyways, um, because in Jung, what was really conspicuously absent was this what the philosophers care about, reality, the world. Um, and I've read from different people, they made the same critique towards Jung, that he was somehow really almost in his own psychotic world
Yeah.
and really trying with artistic attempts,
Mhm.
trying to make sense of this world.
Yeah.
Although these different people, the critique was that you're so absorbed by your interiority, by the world of your inner being, that you completely forget the outside world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was for me, one of the most powerful critiques of Jung, for example.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was so to say, still in this Kantian Cartesian framework,
Yep.
and just working with his own interior surface, or depth actually, and really going, not looking for depth outside, but much more inside, always going deeper inside, deeper inside, deeper inside. Um, while philosophers have always cared more about, okay, how is our things, showing up? How is reality showing up?
Yeah.
Um, that was still, for me,
Yeah.
that was one of the more powerful critiques of
Totally.
Jung, because this can lead into this Gnostic dualism,
Yeah.
when this when the outside world is just corrupted, and it's more about preserving the soul and
Yeah.
integrating it towards some higher state,
Yeah.
and then also the only thing that's then really real is your, like for Descartes, it's your thinking.
Subjectivity. Yeah. Yeah.
um so yeah, with relation, it's kind of interesting. It pops up now a lot. it
Mm.
it seems to become like a guiding word for a lot of endeavors. that's
Yeah.
that's how it seems to me. So I'm reading a book now by a German psychiatrist and philosopher, and he basically wants to make the argument that psychiatry is um, is a relational medicine.
Yes.
And it's in the job of therapy or psychiatry is not to search for isolated causes in a kind of reductionistic fashion,
Yeah.
but to see even something like psychopathology as breaks or cracks of how we are relating to the
Yes.
world, of
Yes.
our relational experiencing
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah.
And that many and then there's a last thing that's also maybe interesting in this in my university. One of the key findings in when you compare all schools, all methods, there's one factor that's most important for success in the therapeutic setting, and that's the relation
Yeah.
between the therapist and the client.
Yeah.
That's the single most
Yeah.
uh, um, effective thing
Yeah.
that was identified over all
Yes.
methods, all schools.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing is the relation
Yeah.
between the therapist and the client.
Yeah.
So the relation is a mystery though still. There's a lot of mysterious things to relation.
Really,
Because
really
for
mysterious.
me, right, relation is also then about sense or meaning, and then we can connect it to Scholé. Something like relation can only come about in Scholé,
Yeah. Yeah.
because before something like that, it's like it's like disrupted. It's like
Yeah.
um, there's one passage in Nishitani in Religion and Nothingness where he describes the field of nihility. And in the field of nihility, it's like I've called this before something like an ontological alienation.
Yeah.
On the field of nihility, it's like all things are dispersed in such a way that like there's the sense tangent they are on,
Hmm.
they do not cross.
Yeah.
And he described this with in Russian literature with like Dostoevsky novels that there are these abyssally lonely
Yeah.
guys who really and who are like even their own mothers are terrified of these guys. Because their nihility is so all encompassing, so they are really in this own sheltered world. This
Yeah.
is also a little bit like the Heideggerian standing reserve.
Yeah.
In the standing
Totally.
reserve, there's no like things are gathered in this strange way where they're all posited in
Yeah.
a very
Yeah. Yeah.
um, um, secluded way, and
Yeah.
similar
Yeah.
like
They
the
negate their own gathering as the thing.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a strange thing.
Like the Cartesian ego that's
Yeah.
also encaged in its in the mind,
Yeah.
something like that. While in Scholé, then things are gathered into a world, or perhaps Nishitani might say the circumsessional interpenetration, where then the field of emptiness is of such a kind where there is a genuine relational interpenetration of all things, and they form a coherent whole, perhaps we might say a gestalt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, yeah, I really like a therapy approach that
Right.
helps us maybe to get a sense of this.
Yeah. Totally. You know what? One of the things it's kind of interesting to kind of look at here is was it who was it? Jordan Hall put out this little tweet where he said the opposite of um, of ideology is relation,
Mm,
and
mm,
I- and and I kind of responded and I said another word for relation is person,
mm,
and and it is really interesting because so if you think about at some level, it seems like most psychopathology, right? I know that for me, the way I get crazy, right? The way my neurotic anxieties and my neurotic kind of dissociations and all this kind of stuff. If you get that down to them, I'm just there are these places that I'm kind of a hyper Cartesian, right? I'm like a
Mm,
self-enclosed subject that sees a world that's like overgeneralized or all the cognitive distortions are there. But all of that kind of undergirds this kind of um, you could call it a kind of ideology, right?
mm,
Uh, an unreflected upon assumption, right? That has the world show up in this definite way, right? That just refers
yeah,
back
yeah.
to itself, right? In a strange way, right? And then your emotions kind of your emotional life starts to like react to it, but yet confirm it and drive it deeper, right? All of that kind of stuff seems to be grounded in this really hyper Cartesian sense, right? Um, but relation, like this is the other thing about relations, right? This is kind of interesting, and why I said like relation. Another way of saying relation is person, and this really, I think, comes from the Orthodox tradition, right? And this way that I think a lot of the sense of the sense of God, right, in the Orthodox tradition. They've really preserved this sense of the ineffable nature of God, the apophatic nature of God, right? Yet they do this strange thing where they also say, like, without negating that God's person.
Mm, mm,
Such a strange thing when you really think about it, right? Such a strange thing when you're really thinking about it. Like, well, like, what does that mean, right? And and I think what they're getting at, right, or a piece of what they're getting at is that to be a person, right, is already right precedes is preceded by relation, right, and
mm,
comes to in relation, right, and
yeah.
calls forth relation. It's like you can't separate person and relationality. Like a person devoid of a context doesn't it there's nothing about it that makes any sense. It's like unintelligible in some way. And so if you think about kind of like the way that in the kind of the icon of the marriage, right, in
Mhm.
medieval times was an icon for the cosmos itself. Like a marriage was a coming together, right, that in some sense realized a whole that was riding through everything. Like the marriage was a symbol, right, of the way that the whole cosmos came together, right? And and I think that there's something about this because I always got this sense like with encircling, right? Um, there's this kind of way where I oftentimes have this feeling like we're reenacting the whole thing,
Mhm.
right? Like somehow by minding the relation, right, and being together for
Mm,
the relation and bringing our attention to a person, and then like explicitly noticing the relation that happens that's beyond us. That there's something about the way that takes hold that is enacting something that is kind of going on all the time everywhere, right? It makes it
mm,
really alive. And I think that's the very thing that keeps drawing me to circling is because it taps into this inexhaustible fount, right? But there's
yeah.
some way where that fount is like seems to be an inexhaustible fount of intelligibility, right? Is kind of like well, what is intelligibility?
Mm,
Intelligibility is drawing together all like it's realizing the relation between all things and how they all connect together, right? So in some sense, this like to be in a therapy session, right? To have this one space where you get to come to yourself and have time for yourself, right? It's not a self in isolation. It's the self in its most primordial sense, right? That
Yeah,
it's realizing a relation that goes all the way down.
yeah. And right, this is right. John Levicki he called this right reciprocal opening. Um, it's interesting, right? In Dostoevsky, in the demons, right? There are these revolutionaries who are, and I like the thing with ideology, who
Yeah,
are complete ideologues,
yeah,
who believe in like this one proposition
yeah,
and want the revolution, and you know what, and only that. Similarly, an addict is related to one thing,
yeah,
namely the thing he's craving,
yeah,
for the alcohol, the drugs, whatever.
yeah,
Um, and then when, right, when therapy, then when it works, then you discover, oh, and then there's like through this it takes virtues, agape, for example, and so on.
yeah,
Um, through this I don't know, giving yourself over to the client, or opening, providing the space for the client. Um, and he or she can they can come out of this kind of I don't know, this enclosure that I tried to describe before, and then they can really discover the world again.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and then, of course, also realize that um, there's not just this one this this ideological, I
mm,
don't know, connection to the world.
mm,
This just the one thing to which I'm relating myself, but
yeah,
the whole world basically waiting to be discovered.
yeah,
And then you see, oh, I'm really related to all these things.
yeah,
It's interesting also that the trans, like to talk a little bit about this circumsessionality. This is a strange word,
mm,
um, but the translate in Nishitani's religion, nothingness. He basically he basically has had this term. It's from the relationship within the Trinity,
yeah,
which for Christian theology is the deepest form of relationality.
yeah, yeah,
That can be that is so.
yeah,
Um, because and this is a weird thing. So there are these turnings. So things can also turn into like an unworld where things
mm,
aren't you aren't really in a world with things. I mean, there are things,
yeah,
but they seem distant, they seem senseless, they seem maybe artificial. This is why we have this thing called meaning crisis, because our world seems sterile and weird
yeah,
and strange and
yeah,
unhomely and so on. But at the same time, things can turn and into wonder and
yeah,
sensefulness
yeah,
and
yeah,
meaningfulness.
yeah,
And relation, and because I talked with Tom, who is unfortunately not here today,
yeah,
but he pointed me to this, that in the etymology, relatus, this latus means to bear, to carry forth.
yeah,
And that's an interesting word.
yeah,
Uh, I played around with this. I don't know why this is there. It's even in the German word Verhältnis. You also have
mm,
this carrying. And I thought, language wants to tell us something. So, and for me, this is like something. I thought relation is something like the capacity to bear a world.
Yeah.
something like that, or
Yeah.
to open up a world. Um, so it's really it's not a static thing, but something that needs to be always upheld
Yeah.
by by us in this sense. This is even right in therapy or in all these relational practices. Once the attention is diverted, then suddenly it can happen that, oh, suddenly you feel again disconnected to the whole process.
Mm.
And
Yes.
the whole thing, goes astray.
Yeah.
But once all the participants are really keeping their attention and really keep themselves in this holding that
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
that 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 the world is kept or gathered together in a sense,
Yeah.
then it works.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even in meditation, it's like there's this one line from Dogen. I can't call it something like um, just uh, something like sit straight
Mm.
and and the whole world
Mm.
will place itself in the right way.
Yeah.
I don't, it's different. I
Yeah.
can't remember it right now, but it's something like that. It's just once you have the right posture,
Yeah.
once you sit like in meditation, then the whole world
Yeah.
is ordering itself, is gathering itself.
Yes. 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 Yeah. It's like it's so I mean it's so everything that you're talking about like just really really I mean one thing that I can feel kind of one is challenged to get over, right, is this kind of substance metaphysics, right? Like because I think what you're pointing to is in some way from a kind of a substance metaphysic, meaning like the Aristotelian sense of like now like being is the kind of the one substance that stays the same through all of the many things, right? Then at some level, like things are relationship becomes things that then relate, right? Because they're just broken up
Yeah,
instances of this that then relate. But the primary thing isn't a relation. The primary thing is this substance, right? It's this whole, I don't know if I'm getting it totally straight, right?
yeah. I mean, Heidegger would say, right? I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but the beingness of beings. So
Yeah.
you start by any being, let's say this glass, and then you say, oh, what categories
Yeah.
um, belong to this glass, and
Yeah.
then you kind of arrive from starting by beings and going then towards the beingness of
Yes.
beings, which Aristotle determined in the kind of way that you described. And then
Yeah.
there are these, for example, there are the four causes that are very famous,
Yes.
so and so on. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's by start because we start from beings in a
Yeah.
sense, and then we
Yeah.
work ourselves toward beingness,
Yeah.
and in that
Totally.
sense,
And what you're I think everything that you're pointing to is not presupposing a substance, right? You're presupposing something like at the ground of everything, right, is a relation, not and this is kind of working off of that book. I think something about Neoplatonism and Heidegger. I'm forgetting the title, but where he's really working through this, what he thinks was Plato was reaching at, right? And in some sense, Aristotle went another way, right?
mm,
In some sense, in a misinterpretation in his view of Plato, right? but Plato didn't completely bring it together. He was groping at it, he was hinting at it, but it never really kind of came together fully in Plato. And he thinks that Heidegger, right, really comes back. He grabs this element that didn't come all
Mm,
together, and Heidegger, I don't know what Heidegger would think about like him picking up the Neoplatonic
yeah,
project,
yeah,
right? But in some strange way, like he's in this book, he's really showing like in a way that I think is very coherent. Hang on one second. One second. There we go. Yeah. Thanks, talking about my baby just figured out how to open the door for the first time.
wow,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, yes. Talking about relationality. No, but this that he makes in this book, he's making this distinction between the pure, what I'll call the pure relation, and the relata, right?
Mhm.
And and essentially he's kind of getting to that that everything really like things really only make sense if you, in some sense, um if being itself is the deepest principle, if you will, right, is a pure relation, right? In the way that he kind of gets at this, and he goes into a very, in this book, he goes into a very like almost technical like way of addressing this, but like and you pointed to this earlier when you said there's something really mysterious going on in relation, right? Like there's something
Yeah,
not so obvious going on, and all you got to do is ask yourself, there's you and I, and we're in relationship, but where's the relationship,
yeah,
right? Is it in you? Is it in me? Right? Is it between?
yeah,
Right? There's this thing that where it's like somehow the relation must kind of precede and
yeah,
at the same time recede, right? And
yeah,
it's this I sense, and as you talked about earlier, like that there's something, this word relation keeps coming up, right? But it's starting to
mhm.
become important to think relation without things related, right? And that key is what I would imagine, right? A lot of the people that you're studying in psychology that you're drawn to on some level are approaching that.
Yeah. I mean, there are many mysterious things. One funny thing is that in the 1940s or so, like even Fritz Perls, but also, for example, the guy, what was his name, Moreno, who was the inventor of psychodrama. He
Mhm.
was also a Jew who emigrated to New York. Um, and somebody else, I forgot now. All of these guys, they wanted to basically provide the practice to this kind of Heideggerian philosophy, what was back then still existentialism.
Mm.
And my feeling is that these people are very great practitioners in also drawing in all sorts of, different influences.
Yeah.
Um, but why those things work, I'm not sure if I don't think they have the right
Account
kind
for.
of philosophical or theoretical framework,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
things work, but we don't know why.
Yeah.
That's kind of it's
Yeah.
like when John in his meaning crisis series, it's like with agape. It's like I love my child and it grows and it becomes a person.
Yeah.
But why does why does it work? Why does love work? It's
Yeah.
very mysterious, right?
Yeah.
There's a deep mystery there.
Yeah.
Um, Now I remember though that Ivo, uh, so De Gennaro, he described the principle as self-seizing. So
Yes.
cipio means seizing, grasping,
Yeah.
comes from the Latin capio.
Yeah.
And the German word Anfang uh,
Yeah.
is has the similar thing. So this means that the principle is only relating itself to itself.
Yeah.
But because of that, because it relates, because it's ontologically completely different. That's what
Yeah.
the ontological difference. It
Yeah.
doesn't relate to anything, but precisely because of that,
Mhm.
it creates, it affords
Yeah.
that all things in the world can
Yeah.
relate themselves to each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
And the task of the human being is to mind that weird element
Yeah.
such that things can come into relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would still say that then the virtues to become important because, again, in the Christian thing, then love is so important because love is something like is like in in loving another person, you kind of analogically participating with God's love.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
something like that. It's like there's this fountain, and you tap into it by again behaving yourself in such a way that
Yeah.
that love can really realize itself in the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Um, so what then what then would be the ground of all things is not beings, but Dasein. So being there.
Yeah.
And be really not being there in a kind of static way,
Yeah.
but being there in this kind of always enacting
Yeah.
being in the world.
Yeah.
And that's why I like those 5 or 4 cognitive sciences. Because what they tell us is that being in the world is always enacted,
Yeah. Yeah.
embedded, embodied,
Yeah.
and so on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's no static things relating in somehow, but
Yeah.
this like being is always enacted.
Yeah.
Being is always we always have to hold each other in the world in a certain sense.
Yeah. I would imagine this is what those psychologists who like do things like in therapy that are highly
Mm.
relational that work, but they don't have good accounts for it, right? In some sense,
That's, they
understand.
might not like to they might
Yeah.
not like to hear that, but
Yeah. Yeah. They in some sense understand something that they can't articulate, right? Um, that this it is really strange to think about what it is to be a person, right? Like to think about this. Like, and I
mm.
think that there's something really, really deep going on in in the Orthodox notion of, well, the Trinity and like what is a person, right? Because usually, like what can be strange about this is if you think about a person, like when I think about a person, I see kind of like an outline of a human figure or something and a face or something like that. But like it's basically saying that no person, like there's personing, right? Like
Mhm.
there's
Yeah.
like even cartoons or something about whatever a person is. It's like it can, you can have a little sponge with, become a person, right? There's something ecstatic, right, in the
Mm.
person, right? It's always standing out, right? Its way of being itself is by standing out of itself, right? And you think about this in some way like uh this Yanaris, right? This who is I think he died a couple of years ago, but he's I think the most prolific Orthodox theologian in our time, who basically really really was a deep student of Heidegger in a serious way, right? And kind of articulated a lot of the Orthodox thinking. Is really interesting because he's got in fact the guy that wrote the book about Neoplatonism and relation in Heidegger, said that Ionaris was the one who kind of grasped this at the deepest level. But he I've been in his book that I'm reading right now called Eros and Relation, or no, Eros and Person. Um, he's using this really interesting analogy where he kind of goes like, with Van Gogh, you can identify a Van Gogh painting, right? You can tell it's a Van Gogh painting. And he's talking about that, like, actually Van Gogh is so much more disclosed, right? In his in his paintings, right? Than he could ever be in his biography or any,
Mm. Yeah.
right? Like, or any other way of like or met or you can track his heartbeat, you can do all kinds of, like, his whole life, and you can imagine, right, you could that somebody could have the same exact biography and not express what is expressed in those paintings, which is
Mm.
really interesting when you think about this, right? Like, so he's basically saying that, like, where what those paintings do is, in some sense, they disclose the being of Van Gogh. They disclose the person of Van Gogh, right? In
Mm.
the way that it somehow get because you can't reduce how you recognize a Van Gogh painting, right? Because it's nothing you can reduce or calculate, right? It's like there's a through line that goes through all those things. And I think what he's saying is like it was like the art was this kind of ecstatic moment where Van Gogh was basically his logos, right, was being gathered by the logos, and his the,
Mm.
the encounter of the world ripening, right, into the context of his person, right, in some sense, is as deep as being in some way, right? So essentially, like, he's basically saying again that Van Gogh is a relation. He's not a substantial character. He's not most essentially this 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 clump of meat that had a heartbeat that lived in a certain period in a certain time, right? That even that is somehow is inside of this deeper horizon, which is something like a person, right?
Mm.
And I think you also get this sense in the word Gelassenheit, right? This I think that there's something going on there of, like, this kind of letting be. And
Yeah.
I think Rilke hones in on this in the that line in one of his early poems where he says, may you ripen the world with your gaze,"
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
There's this kind of, you can
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
yeah, like this, that there's
There,
something about the beholding that is
yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
human being, right? That is the person that
Mm.
persons the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
But that's can I right? I mean that this is great, right? Because we can even phenomenologically, I think, distinguish different gazes,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
What you said before, right? You can look at somebody as, for example, um, maybe like almost a year ago, I called this, right, the eye of charity, as
yes,
something that the sages have always tried to cultivate,
yeah,
seeing kind of the mourners, even in the most fallen of our
yeah,
of beings,
yeah,
the criminals, the
yeah,
sinners, and so on,
yeah,
and trying to see, oh, there's a spark of personhood even in that really non-person, and and like Christ was, right, so famous in the Gospels. That's why he became kind of the Messiah, because he went into those regions of of uh, of the world back then where there were the sick, and just his presence made cured this person. So just love, like love, gave them the potential again, so they can become persons.
Yeah.
But again, that's why I like the thing with ideology. But our gaze can also be fixed on one thing.
Yeah.
And we are obsessed with that one goddamn thing, so to
Yeah.
speak, with that. And that can be also a vision of malevolence or terror or whatever. And that's even how we can behold people.
Yeah.
I can see a person for their mourners, or I can see a person. I don't know. I'm angry at you, and even you notice, even when people stare aggressively at somebody, that how their gaze is changing, how their
Oh,
beholding
totally.
is changing,
Yeah.
and how in, let's say, releasement, what you said before,
Yeah.
letting go, or in meditation, how then also your gaze becomes something much more inviting, something much more open, something also much more um, calm and gentle, because everything, whatever comes to you, you invite it into your own beholding.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting that Plato identified, right? He called them the Glaucus. Uh, um, so like you have to become like an owl-eyed,
What was that?
because the owl,
An owl?
hmm?
Like the
Yeah, an owl, because I have it behind the books. It's one of the. It's kind of it's a famous symbol in the
yeah.
Republic. Because
Yeah.
the owl can see in the dark,
Yes.
and a lot of Plato uses a lot of analogies with seeing, right?
Yeah.
We are blinded
Yeah.
first when we see the light that emanates from the idea of the good and so on.
Yeah.
Um, so the task of the philosophers is to become like an owl,
Yeah.
and so we can see those things that are invisible.
Yeah.
What is ultimately invisible is relation also.
Yeah. Yeah.
This you said before, it's like there are relators, there are things,
Yeah.
but we have to really become very masters of seeing. So you see, oh, these
Yeah.
things relate in this sense, and like
Yeah.
a therapist, when you go to I don't know, you go to a family, for example. Let's say you're a family therapist, and then you have to, oh, this person is relating to this person in this way, and then maybe those people really don't relate to each other at all.
Mhm.
So you
Yeah.
have to figure out all these tones and grades and colors of relation.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. And there's that, and there's in some sense I can't help but bring to mind sunyata, right?
mm,
And emptiness. At least one of the things that John said on my last conversation with him, where he was saying what I think a Buddhist teacher told him about doing a Dharma talk that he was at about emptiness. He says, "Emptiness comes and goes as you come and go.
mm.
Emptiness comes and goes as you come and go." And it
That's very simple.
very simple, but like there's so much
I like
there,
that.
right? Because I think one of the things that I mean, the habit of thought is to think of the emptiness as kind of like something like static space,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And that
yeah, yeah.
there's a space that kind of stays the same, and then things somehow, come and go out of that space. But if you actually, it's funny, if you really zoom in on that, that doesn't make any sense, because it's like, where does this space go when it's occupied? well, if it goes away, right, then how can it be occupied? All right, like
Mhm.
so,
Yeah.
but so basically, kind of get this sense of like that in some sense, form and space co-arise, right? They mutually interpaint, like interpenetrate each other, right? and
Yeah.
and even like, I think in the Buddhist sense of like um uh different I've heard different teachers kind of emphasize this sense of, don't forget that emptiness is really talking about dependent arisings, right? It's basically saying that in some sense it's empty in the sense that like there's no thing there that isn't already pointing beyond itself and referencing everything else as a dependent on something else, and there's no single thing. And that whole sense of things presupposes and is imbued by some kind of openness, right? Um,
Mhm.
and and that, like, so for two people to come into a relationship, for it to be a real relationship, right? Um, which by the way, it doesn't guarantee when two people come together that there's a real relation going on. And I think it's precisely like if you're ideologically possessed, right? There's it's kind of like that kind of I it relationship versus I
Yeah,
thou,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because to be related is in some sense is as I reach into you, you simultaneously reach into me, and knowing you is in some sense being it's synonymous with being changed by you, right? It's this, it's this, it's not these 2 points that connect, it's a relation, right? And I think this is one of the things that, like, I would say, in my estimation, what modern technology really did in this terms is is separate out the ability to connect from relation, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
and in some sense, I think that's been the uncollapsing of those two things, right? Like, has a lot to do with why 50% of people report having no close friends, right? There's something really devastatingly transformative in making relation and and connection and relation uncoupled, right? Because it used to be just like, if you had to talk to somebody or connect with somebody, you at least had to talk with them on the phone, right?
Mm.
And now you can, so many other options, like, and relation happens to be this, it's something that you suffer through, right? So it's like
Yeah,
your nervous
yeah,
system
yeah, yeah.
has a choice. It's just going to it's going to send the text or whatever, or have AI do it or something like that, right?
Mm. It's interesting, right? Heidegger, he said, Gestell, so like the standing reserve, the gathered standing, the gathered positing, the gathered standing is something like, I think the what something like the negative
Photograph.
uh, photograph of Agnes. So
Yeah.
or you could sort of an owning. So you could, because an owning, this very key word, it also has to do with, right, owning, right? It has this very strong embodied enacted aspect that are
Yeah.
so important for the 4E cognitive science.
Yeah.
um what I want to say is, for Heidegger, this he coined, right, he has then this term, the fourfold,
Yeah.
and he talks about the gathering of the four regions. And when
Yeah.
you read, for example, the Thing essay, which is very famous,
Yeah.
you also see that he also describes how then those four regions interpenetrate
Yeah.
and how they relate to each other.
Yeah.
And that's for him, that relation, so to say, can be sheltered in each and every thing. That's with the Van Gogh painting, right,
Yeah.
that you said.
Yeah.
Then this is then really an artwork when
Yeah.
it's kind of preserving or sheltering
Yeah.
that relation that's
Yeah.
so pristine.
Yeah.
But that has, as you say, that needs to always be upheld by the human being.
Yeah.
And technology is this very strange thing where it makes our lives, in a sense, very easy, but we forget to bear relation, to hold relation,
Yeah. Yeah.
and to be in relation. That
Yeah.
we really um, so the world is coming together,
Bear to
but
suffer.
but but
Yeah.
things and people are left in meaninglessness.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
This starts to get at kind of just in some sense, you know, relationships like with people, they don't just happen. They're not just given. I mean, just look at our own lives, right? Like you stop paying attention to your partner, right? Or you stop being relational or tending to your relationships, the relationships disappear, right? Or they go south or they degrade, right? I think there's such a sense where it's like, in some sense, if you're a grandfather, right, and at your funeral, right, the your grandchildren have a genuine mourning, right,
mm,
over your
mm,
loss. In some sense, you're witnessing a real accomplishment, right?
mm,
Like it's relationships are to undergo relation, right? And it is suffering. Like it's just there's just no wonder if it's optional, right? Like we won't take it because it's basically if it's not bound in necessity, like we're right, we'll just move away from it. Um, so there is this way where it's like like real relationships are genuine accomplishments. They really just don't happen on their own, like
mm,
in some sense, right? And it's like you have to undergo conflicts. You have to undergo it's one of the things that's strange. Like what's like paradoxical about relationships is what gives the relation is the way that you're different, right? Like there's something about you and I that like on one level there's something about us that is so fundamentally deeply the same that we can never get to the bottom. Like we can't even comprehend. And at the same time, right, there is a uniqueness to you that I'll never be able to make subject of me. It's what grants your otherness. But is that very otherness, right? That is the very thing that affords the relation, right? For me to then relate to you, this difference, right? And so inherently, like you can get the sense of bearing, right, in relationality
mm.
to undergo something, right? And technology, just basically another way of saying technology is removing friction, right? Like Heidegger talks about, is like the more technological something is, the more it collapses distances. But what he also says is that it's paradoxically the nearer things are, the more concealed they are, right? Like the further away they become for us, right? Like the more that you remove the otherness, the friction, right, the undergoing something get to know
Yeah.
it, to bear the suffering of the conflict, and then still turn toward the other and work through it and get the context, like
Yeah.
is in some sense is to undergo you being changed, and the knowledge of the other are and you being changed are the same, right?
Yeah. He calls it something like obtrusive nearness or obtrusive
Yeah,
proximity.
yeah,
So like technological things, they are so handy and they're really easy to use.
yeah,
So
yeah,
this nearness is one that's so where we it's a kind of sterile nearness.
yeah,
That's kind of what it is. It's like everything feels very nice and
Yeah.
It's very strange also, like that we've even created these things,
Yeah.
and we could have like 10 dialogues just on what technology is. Uh,
Yeah.
but I mean, with relationship, for me, that goes a little bit to Scholé.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh, yes.
because
I'm glad you're bringing
we've
that back around. Yes.
we've always, right, we've always tried to figure out, right, Plato tried it in the Republic. How can we build a state? How can we realize politeia, so polisness? How can we realize community? Yeah. um Now the answer, I think the answer that um philosophies and wisdom traditions give is, hmm, we have to learn to hold ourselves to this invisible nothing.
Yeah.
And from there on, we will learn how to become more compassionate, loving, kind, moderate,
Yeah.
forgiving, and so on.
Yeah.
That's why we have something like Christianity, and it has such a profound impact on the world,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
um, like when we do these things and act accordingly, then we become closer to the principle,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then something like human communities can flourish and so
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And if that is not the case, then we become again ideologues. We
Yeah.
become possessed, and like the title from Dostoevsky's one of these great novels,
Yeah.
the demons or the possessed. And that that also, I think that's why a lot of thinkers, I think, have characterized the modern world as this having this heat, because um, we are we, we are gradually becoming more obsessed with
Yeah.
and,
Yeah. It's kind of an idolat, like
and then when you see it
on steroids.
neurobiologically, right? We are creating these dopaminergic, like we talked before we started recording, right? You talked about the grocery store. It's like we've built a world that's just, that is kicking on dopamine,
Yeah. Yeah.
everywhere you take in sugar and caffeine and who knows what, but it's like it's all just, and pornography and these social media, the likes and all of this kind of bullshit. We're just
Yeah.
getting more and more dopamine, and
Demanding.
basically creating cycles of addiction.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Totally. And so I just want to, I want to just kind of go back to what you just said about it's really important that we, I don't know how you put it, ground, have in view, orient this in this no thingness, right? And to the
yeah.
degree that we do that is to the degree that we will find ourselves comporting to the world in a more compassionate, relational
Yeah.
way. And
Yeah.
what's really interesting to think about that is like is in this no thingness, right? Like in some sense, the most personal relationship one ought to have, right, is to love this,
Mm.
right? I've been going to the liturgy of the Greek Orthodox Church down the street from where I am,
Mm.
and so it is the first one I went to is really interesting. Like, first of all, it's like such a trip. The Orthodox liturgy is, my understanding is I've done some reading on it, and like no, like the reading I've done on it, once you're in there, I'm like I don't understand a thing going on other than it's something like they're enacting the union of heaven and earth, right? And from their vantage point, they're actually doing that, right? And they act that way, right? It's like this whole thing. You walk in and it's
Mm.
like there's just these psychedelic paintings everywhere, right? Like on the ceiling, and all these icons and the 12 apostles and all the it just the whole thing is just doing what it does. And then there's a bunch of there's um the deacon and I don't understand all the roles, but everyone's singing, right? And I don't understand hardly any of it, right? But like I remember being in the first hour, there's like I can't quite follow the singing, right? Because in some levels they're not really singing a song exactly. They're actually singing paragraphs of
Yeah.
right. It's and so it's a strange list. It's something very strange about it. And then so the
Mm.
first hour is just that, and I'm not understanding any of it. So then I just kind of start. I basically just sit and open and just kind of meditate in a certain sense, taking it in. And then I hadn't noticed, and I was sitting towards the front. And when I walked in, by the way, no one else was there. I was the only person there when it started, and I was like right in the front. And then about an hour into it, unbeknownst to me, there's this way in the back on the towards the ceiling is this I comes this female choir, this like, and I didn't even know that there was. I didn't. It was my first time. I didn't even know that anyone was back there or anything was going on. And like, so there's these men singing and like this kind of ritual going on, and I'm not quite understanding all of it, but I can kind of feel it. And then all of a sudden, there's this woo, like comes from the back, and I'm just like, whoa. I feel all this love and like and I'm crying and like I, it's and but then he says and it's that then there's this point where the priest or the head guy who's kind of the ceremonial person of the church at some point there's about like 5 minutes where he actually kind of doesn't sing and he just addresses in normal conversation, right, the people there. And it's so interesting to have him just speak normally, sandwiched in this like ritual that had been going on and vibrating through everything for, the last hour and a half. Man, that what he ends up saying just goes so deep, right, in your soul. But the first
Mm.
one really struck me, and I think he was basically talking about he was naming something in one of the gospels where I think Jesus was talking about discussing something, saying something about the Ten Commandments or something like that. And he
Yeah.
said like the first commandment was like essentially what I heard um, was something like love God with your whole mind, your whole heart,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
your whole soul.
Yeah.
The thing I kind of heard through that was essentially like what he was saying is like, and if you just really do that, what was implied is like all the rest of the commandments will just happen,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and in some sense, he was emphasizing like I think it's like you can't like the commandments can be this transactional thing that you do just following the rules or something like that. But if you actually really the
Yeah.
whole thing, if you like the whole thing somehow be there, if you love God with if you pour fully, the commandments will be like the blossom of the tulips that will just unfold as they do, right, on their own.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and that really is like it's about a month ago, and that's really sunk into me. in a big way,
Hmm.
like that sense. And I hear that in what you're talking about is minding or orienting or being in relationship with this no thingness, right?
Hmm.
That there's something, it's like there's some deep profound full love relation, right?
Yeah, that's why Plato called the attraction towards being, towards the principle, eros.
Yeah,
Eros
yeah,
is not an erotic love or something,
yeah,
but for Plato, this love
yeah,
towards the principle is eros.
yeah,
And in Christianity, it's kind of reversed because then God is giving agape towards us.
yeah, yeah,
And that's another mystery. Uh,
yeah,
um, but it's almost like it's almost like being is love. Then
yeah,
we can think about that, um, from a Christian point of view, I think being one could make the statement that or the proposition that being is love,
yeah,
because being has this gift character
yeah,
always. We are
yeah,
always standing in the gift of being,
yeah, yeah,
and and our ontological task is to Kabbalah, right? If this idea of the repairing of the vessels.
yeah,
Uh, first there's Tzimtzum, there's this this outpouring of God, and then the vessels are shattered, and then the human beings have to repair the
yeah,
vessels. It's
yeah,
similar to what the Greeks call saving the phenomena.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, like Christ in this one commandment. I actually because when I did the reading group with Tom and a few others, I know that I mean it was from Seth. Do you remember Seth? We had those conversations with him and Seb 3 years ago.
yeah,
He really liked that commandment, and I think he told me once that he says it every day
yeah, yeah,
as a kind of personal, also personal commandment, because it really encaptures
yeah,
almost everything that's said in the Gospels by Christ, I
yeah,
think.
yeah,
And you can, I think, and I will go soon. I think you can maybe see then the gravity of also the statement that God is dead, or suddenly that because of suddenly the arrival of the scientific way of looking at the world,
yeah,
which suddenly made the idea of God, right, almost abstruse, absurd, unbelievable, and so on. And suddenly, when we can't, again, when there's no God that we can love,
yeah,
then when there's no principle that we can mind,
yeah, yeah,
then and the whole, as Nietzsche prophesied, then the whole world will fall into chaos.
yeah, yeah, totally.
And that's what makes that we somehow recover all of this. That is really the most important task, I would say.
Yeah. It seems to me I get a hint. It seems to be whatever this no thingness is, that my sense of the movement around it, right, is um it's like what kind of, in some sense, what kind of happened in the West, right, was on this subtle way that turned into some of this image of perfection, this eternal, this eternal um being, in some sense, right? The onto theological thing where it's like God became this sense of eternity, this unchanging but static father, if you will, right? And my sense is the coming back to this, right? As we whatever age we're going into right now, like it seems like whatever that this is, be something more like like to think the difference between the eternal transcendent horizon, like the distant father, to something like the fount of inexhaustibility, right? Those are very different. Those strike me as very different kinds of disclosures, right?
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
in some sense, like there's for some reason this sense of that the ultimate thing being an inexhaustible fount of intelligibility, and having this sense of an like we don't know what's coming. It could go into all these different directions. This kind of variability,
Mm.
right, and huge complexity, right? Yet there's there's an infinite. It's inexhaustible, right, in that sense, right? Like that dynamic
Yeah,
relation seems super important right now.
yeah. And right, this is what I tried to say before with the love of we participate in love.
Yeah,
We do not make it. We do not. It's
yeah,
not that I am the source of love when I'm loving somebody else.
yeah,
It's more that I'm participating
yes,
in love. Just
yes,
as right with truth, goodness, beauty, and so on, we are participating in those things.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
participating in the transcendentals,
yeah,
but we're not the source of it in a sense. Right?
yeah,
We're participating in them. So the again, the source of these things is this what you just call right the fountain, the wellspring of intelligibility.
yeah,
And that's right. That's perhaps something to keep in mind also, right? And
yeah,
then you get to this strange middle mode also where um, it's not I love this, but
yeah,
there's more something like love uh, realizes itself,
yeah.
and there's just this flourishing and blossoming.
In some sense, through my poverty, right?
Yeah, yeah. This is right. This is what releasement is about, right? I'm taking myself out of the picture,
Yeah,
such that the world can world itself, as
yeah,
Heidegger said, or the thing
yeah,
can thing itself.
yes, yes,
Um, and that, yeah, I mean that's one aspect of this what the human being ought to do.
yeah,
And that's why again sages always right that there's this long tradition in Christianity of this self-emptying, this becoming poor, and so on. This the right like Francis of Assisi, and then all the monastic orders and so on, and even Christ lives it out in his life, right?
yeah, yeah. Really good talking with you, my friend.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, awesome. So
Thanks,
we will connect again. All right.
of course. Um, until next time. Bye bye.